When you read what the president wrote, when you listen to your now former colleagues, Republicans on Capitol Hill, talking about changing the rules, can you understand where they're coming from? They want to see something happen. They're frustrated with the results. Is that enough of a case to make here to get the rules changed?
Oh, absolutely not. They already have the procedural capability of moving forward under reconciliation with 51 votes, both on health care and on tax reform. And in fact, it's much easier to do under tax reform than it is health care. All they have to do is reach an agreement amongst themselves as to what they're going to pass on health care, and it can be a massively slimmed down version if they wish. And then they can move on to a major, robust tax reform package. Again, they have to reach agreement amongst the Republicans to pass it. And they can do it with 51 votes. So I'm not sure the president understands what he's talking about, to be very honest with you. The rules are there. They're available under reconciliation to do both health care, or a large percentage of health care, and to do the entire tax bill.
A couple of days after the election, you wrote a piece for The Hill, the newspaper down in Washington, D.C., about reconciliation in the context of tax reform. And you wrote this: when a law that's going to affect most Americans is passed, it must be viewed as fair. Fairness in our system is defined by bipartisanship. The arbitrary and officious use of a majority position will lead inevitably to extreme opposition by the minority and popular support for their frustration. Seems very prescient to me now as I read that a few months hence. How do we get to a position where there is more bipartisanship? But why is it the case that there seems to be none on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think history proves that phrase to be correct, in that the Obamacare bill was passed under reconciliation, and as a result, no Republicans voted for it. And from day one, it was distrusted. It was not seen as fair or viable by a large percentage of the American population. Tax reform should be done in a bipartisan way. Last time major tax reform was done, it was done under Reagan, Rostenkowski, bipartisan. The last major bill written was by myself and Ron Wyden, bipartisan. And of course, Simpson Bowles had a bipartisan bill. Unfortunately, Senator Schumer has said that they're just simply not going to cooperate. They're not going to participate in governing. The Democratic leadership of the House and the Senate has walked away from the table. And so even though you've got a number of people, especially in the Senate, who are willing to go across the aisle on the Democratic side on issues like tax reform, it doesn't appear their leadership's going to allow them to. So if the Republicans want to do tax reform, regrettably, and I do say this sincerely, regrettably, it's going to have to be done under reconciliation. It's going to have to be done on a partisan vote where virtually no Democrats will support it.
Does it necessitate a scaling back of ambition? That is, if you want to get something through that is bipartisan, you're not going to be able to go for the comprehensive bill. You're not going to be able, perhaps, to pursue personal and corporate tax reform at the same time. Am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, I'm afraid you are, because right now, Democratic leadership in the Senate and the House basically is in an obstruction position. They're not willing to help this president out on anything. Even an infrastructure bill, which should be bipartisan, is going to be hard to pass. But a major tax reform bill, or even a very significant tax reform bill, they don't want to be any part. They don't want to have any part of this. They want to be able to attack it as a tax cut for the rich. They want to use that in the next election. They've made that conscious political decision. It's regrettable because there is identity of interest on tax reform, as was shown by Senator Wyden when he drafted a tax reform bill, in that a lot of Democrats want to get rid of a lot of these deductions and exemptions because they consider them special interest benefits, and they will take a rate reduction to do that in place of that. And of course, Republicans want to get the rates down through reducing deductions and exemptions so that people invest for return rather than for tax avoidance. So there's identity of interest, but unfortunately not identity of political purpose.
Respectfully, though, aren't Democrats, or isn't the Democratic leadership, taking a page out of the playbook that Republicans used for the last 8 years? There was an obstructionist agenda that Republicans had in the House and the Senate for those 8 years when President Obama was in the White House.
Yeah, you can definitely argue that. There's no question that Republicans took this position under President Obama, starting with Obamacare, which was passed on a partisan vote. I think that would have been muted considerably. I was there at the time if the President Obama and the Democrats had participated, as they had been up until the final passage. There was actually a bipartisan effort moving forward until the middle of December, when the rug was pulled out from underneath it and they moved with a purely partisan bill. Had the Obamacare been passed in a bipartisan way, I think things would have been a lot better today for everybody.
You were on the House Ways and Means Committee when you represented the New Hampshire 2nd District back in the 80s. What would you say now to the leader of that committee, to Kevin Brady, to the ranking member of that committee, Richard Neal, about how they need to pursue this, about how to get back to the table in the way that you were able to get back to the table in 1987?
I would say go someplace quiet, take the whole committee there, as Dan Rostenkowski did, the chairman. He put us in a room, in a small room, by the way, over in Greenbrier, and we worked it out between us, between the two parties. We understood we had some interests, we understood we had some differences, and we spent a fair amount of time negotiating on this in sort of in camera. And with the politics of the coverage of the social media not existing then, it was easier to do. But I still think it's the best approach. I think that you've got sincere people on both sides of the aisle here who would participate in that, especially in the Senate. And I would take a hard run at that before I went on a purely partisan approach.
So book some rooms at that West Virginia resort. Let me ask you lastly here, Senator, if I could, about the budget that we saw last week from the White House. There are Republicans on the Hill, Democrats on the Hill who don't like it. It doesn't seem like it has much support. What was your read on what we saw from the White House last week?
I thought it was a huge mistake. It was impractical. It was based on assumptions which had no viability. And it claimed it reached balance when everybody knew it wasn't going to come close to being balanced. Didn't take on the two major issues which drive our deficit today on the spending side, which are Medicare and Social Security. And as a result, it really had no credibility. And from the time it was written, probably even before the ink was dry, it had no viability as a document of any seriousness up on the Hill.